This is the True North Collective podcast, a gathering of unsugar-coated conversations on authenticity, created by the real-life documentation of everyday humans fearlessly finding their true north.
Welcome to Season 4 of the podcast.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I recently won the Bright Light Superlative at work. I might go shave my head in the desert soon, and I recently ate 7 bags of cookies in 7 days, and I currently feel like shit.
Hi, I'm Ethan. I played drums in a ska band in high school. I have written and recorded over 20 songs, and I once rode my bike from Seattle to the end of Highway 1 in British Columbia.
Hi, I'm Jenell. When I stay in hotels alone, I turn the heat up to 75 degrees. Burgers are the best post-backpacking treat, and I have nail polish on one of my toes that's been there for 6 months.
And we are your hosts of the True North Collective podcast.
We did it.
We did it.
Okay, Ethan, what was the bike ride that you did?
It was a bike tour with my cousin. So we started in Seattle, and then we actually took a bus to Vancouver and started from there. We went up the kind of inner coast. I forget what it's called. And then we got to the end of one and then came down the Sunshine Coast, which is kind of the coast, the interior coast of Vancouver Island.
You're talking to the right cookie
I know.
here.
I was just like, I did that too.
Oh, you did that too?
Yeah. And then I was like, shut the fuck up.
That's
How did
awesome.
that happen? Yeah.
So you.
But I did it with an organization, so
okay.
I cheated.
That's not cheating. If you ground out those miles on a bike, you did it.
Well, and there was gale force winds one of the days, and so they shut down the track, but several of us got through. And so I was riding with 2 other people, and I was crying because the trees were falling, and I was like, they'd be stopping the race if it was dangerous, right? And they were like, yeah, totally, we think. And then we got like all the way done, and everybody's like, how did you get through? We closed it down. Yeah, it was really scary. Anyways, I stole your story.
No, that sounds like a very different story.
Yeah, what's your rest of yours though?
Yeah, sorry.
Well, mine was that I just got really interested in bike touring after my cousin gave me this book called Travels with Willie by Willie Weir. He's like he's a journalist who writes for the I think it's called the ACTA, American Cycle Touring Association. And it's this great kind of travelogue book. And we both got really into the idea of doing a bike tour. And at the time I was working a corporate job and I just hated working in a cubicle. And I was like, I need to get away from this for like a month. So I just took all the vacation time that I had, plus some unpaid time. And we did this bike tour. And it actually really was the launching point for my tiny house. Like I left on the bike tour and then came back, and while I was on the trip, I kind of we were couch surfing, so we stayed in a bunch of tiny houses, and people kept saying while we were because when you're bike touring, as I'm sure Rachel people just talk to you for whatever reason. You just become this approachable person, and you have nowhere to go because you're on a bicycle.
And that literally happens to me anyways.
Okay.
I literally don't have to do anything and people start telling me their life story. Continue.
Well, then you found the right thing to do, hosting this podcast.
The rest of us need bicycles. It's fine.
Yeah. Exactly. The rest of us need bicycles to make friends out in the world. People kept saying kind of oh, this is going to be such a life-changing trip for you. This is amazing. This is going to change your life. And while I was on the trip, I was just yeah, I just feel really hungry and tired all the time. I don't feel any different. And then kind of when I got back from the trip is when I was realized that my perspective had shifted, and just having spent the month with so few things, just having my life become so simple. I don't remember exactly when I found out that tiny houses on wheels were a thing. But it was soon after I got back that I saw one online, and I was just I'm doing that.
That's
so cool.
I like that the call out, because there's so many things that in my life where it's the same thing. People are like, it's going to change your life. It's going to be this big thing. But when you're in it, you're just kind of like, oh, it. And I think, Rachel, you and I have even been talking about this in general, but like we're living this life that we said we wanted to live. And when you're in it, though, a lot of times it's like, yeah, I'm just tired and I'm hungry. Like I've been traveling around the world, or not around the world, around the United States, as I mentioned, since July, and living out of my car and, you know, staying with friends. And it's been amazing. Don't get me wrong. But a lot of points, you're like, sometimes you're like, this is just really inconvenient in the day to day, or you're just trying to juggle things, or you're stressed out, or you're living out of a suitcase. And there's also many, many like beautiful, beautiful moments, right? Where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this, or this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. But to your story, Ethan, I'm excited to see when I'm done and really have a chance to reflect and I'm out of it. What I'm going to continue to take away from it and see. So I appreciate that call out as someone who is mid journey and adventure right now, and still figuring out what it's all going to mean to me.
I mean, are you familiar with the concept of like type 1 and type 2 fun?
I think so, but remind me.
Well, it's like, my understanding is like type 1 fun is like the fun that's fun while you're doing it. Like going down a water slide, or going on a carnival ride. Whereas type 2 fun is the kind of fun that like isn't really that fun while you're doing it, but like afterwards you're like, that was great, I want to do it again. And bicycle touring definitely is that. It's brutal. It's like brutal while you're doing it, and then you're like, that was amazing.
So running a Ragnar, we have a Ragnar running team, and that's how I always feel when I do it. I don't like running, and it's fun when we're hanging out, but when I'm racing, I'm just like, why did I sign up for this shit? Why am I running 8 miles right now? But then the day after, I'm like, let's do another one.
Exactly.
I had never heard it called that, but I've been not working a lot. I've just been like thinking a lot about short-term versus long-term hits of goodness, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. And how sometimes the short-term painful decision is actually going to get me to the long-term sustained fun. And so I've been playing with those two things. I haven't heard it called type 1 and type 2 of fun. I like that. I like that a lot. How many days were you biking for, or weeks, or how? Yeah.
It was about a month for me.
I did it in 2 days, dude.
Holy crap. But were you carrying all your stuff?
No. But I had a hybrid bike, and everybody was just like, what are you doing?
So you went from Seattle to the end of Highway 1 in British Columbia in 2 days?
I went from Vancouver to Seattle in 2 days.
Oh, from Vancouver to Seattle.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then 2 weeks later, I decided I wanted to do the Grand Fondo. So then I did Vancouver to Whistler. That was unreal.
That's crazy. That's some crazy elevation gain.
It was amazing.
Do you guys know how many miles that is for someone who has no concept of distance between the two?
Oh, here, I'll Google it.
It's about a 3-hour drive, so I'm guessing it's about 180 miles.
It seems like it was longer than that. But yeah, I guess.
That's long. For on a bike.
You could do a centennial right race.
You did almost you did 2 back-to-backs though.
That's right. I did. That is what it was. It was like 200.
We were doing at first like between 50 and 70 miles a day, but this was like fully loaded touring bikes. So like they weighed like 50 pounds, with all your gear, camping gear, sleeping bag, tent, cooking, everything. Those crazy people with the yellow bags on the sides of their bikes. And then we kind of realized that like a 70-mile day was basically like didn't leave any time to experience the places that we were in. And like if we wanted to do any kind of side adventure, like stop and see an attraction or take a walk or do something, that wasn't an option. So we kind of dialed back the itinerary a bit and found that like 30 or 40 miles a day still was like a lot when you're riding those bikes on hilly, terrain, but it was a better pace.
Oh, it's cool. I miss it. I have my bike in, well, I feel similarly about in being in an RV. I just recently bought an RV. It's the same thing. It's like, you can just like go for it and make it work. But then if you don't leave enough time to like stop and see things, it's kind of defeats the purpose. But I miss my bike. I've been carrying it around with me since Vancouver, and it's a great bike, and I want to get back out again. I just moved to California, so I think that there are places around here I can go. I'm just got to find people to take me with the masks on.
Yeah.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. Ethan, I feel like your intro, you're into all the cool things: music, biking, building homes. So should we introduce you?
Yeah.
On that note, you're welcome. I sincerely mean that. I'm always a fan of people that have cool interests. So today we are welcoming Ethan Waldman to the podcast. He is a tiny house author, speaker, and teacher who built his own tiny house on wheels in 2012 and has been passionately helping future tiny home dwellers on their own journeys ever since. So Ethan also has a guide called Tiny House Decisions, which has helped thousands of readers answer the big questions about tiny houses and plan each system in their future home. He also is the creator and host of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, a show that brings you conversations with tiny house luminaries, builders, and DIYers. And Ethan and his wife, Anne, live in their tiny house part-time in northern Vermont. So welcome to the podcast, Ethan. We're excited to have you.
It's good to be here.
So I didn't actually warn you about this one. I think this is the part I missed in the intro. My apologies, but we like to start out post intro by just asking you, what does it look like to be Ethan today? It's a big question. Yes, today, in this moment.
Well, in this particular moment, Ethan works from home as usual, as has been the case for the last like 8 years. But Ethan has reached a point where I'm speaking in third person too.
I love it.
I think it's because you asked the question. You asked the question.
I was wondering if that was like a thing you were into.
No,
I was really hoping.
I can't keep that up for more than a few seconds. So, I've kind of reached the point where, I have my own business and I kind of set my own hours, and I don't sell my time anymore, which was kind of the impetus for me to start the whole tiny house journey in the first place, was like realizing that I didn't want to have to sell my time. And so looking at ways to reduce my expenses so that I could, leave the corporate job and then figure out where to go from there. And so my day was pretty freeform. I spent a couple hours working. I went out for a nice long walk and enjoyed the snow. Played guitar for a couple minutes, and ate at home just like everyone else on the planet.
Perfect. So let's jump right in, because I'm really fascinated in tiny homes. I've kind of similar to Rachel, she said she had an RV. I'd been like debating between van life and then buying an Airstream, and then on this journey of staying in Airbnbs and sleeping in cars. I stayed in a tiny house, a couple of them in Leadville, Colorado, and my parents actually, for whatever reason, seem to really want me to get a tiny house instead of an Airstream. Don't ask me why. Maybe because they've been watching TV shows on it. But so I'm still trying to figure out, like, what does this somewhat like nomadic and also reduction of expenses lifestyle look like? You had mentioned that your ride between Vancouver and Seattle sparked the idea. Like, tell us a little bit more about how that happened.
Sure. Well, so we were doing a self-supported bicycle tour, which meant that we were just carrying our food and lodging with us. And we also made use of the website Couchsurfing, which I don't know, I think they're still around, but it was before Airbnb was really a thing. And it was Airbnb, but free. And we ended up just staying in a few different tiny houses on this bike trip. Just people that we met. And, sometimes obviously they were tiny houses. So we camped on the floor in somebody's and they were up in the loft. And then I think we camped in somebody's yard. And I think that returning from the bike tour back to the like house that I was renting with a friend, you know, full of stuff, full of space and comforts, suddenly felt more like kind of like a weight, an anchor around me that was kind of holding me back from potentially taking the leap and just severing ties with my kind of corporate career that I wasn't that thrilled about. And, you know, housing and rent was like the biggest monthly expense that I had. So I was just like, now how can I get rid of this? And then I also, you know, the idea of building something and learning those skills also really appealed to me.
What
Did
was your
you? Oh,
what
go
was
for
your
it, Rach.
corporate job?
So I studied basically adult learning. It was like a
Cool.
communications program. So I had a background in instructional design and like was working for Green Mountain Coffee Roasters. They're a Vermont company. But they also around before I started working there, but they were an investor in Keurig, you know, those like coffee pods. And that became like this huge thing. So the company was growing like crazy while I was there. But yeah, I liked some elements of the work, like the creativity. I enjoyed creating training products, like basically creating screencasts and movies, and you know, sometimes I mixed my own songs into them. Um, but I didn't love the rigidity of the structure, the 8 to 5, and there was at that point companies weren't as open to letting you work remote. So it was just not a good fit for me. I had moved to Vermont because I love to ski and I love the outdoors, and I was like sitting inside most of the time, which was killing me.
Yeah, totally. I can relate. I was curious because thinking of trying to take on building like a log cabin out of like little sticks,
Yeah.
like popsicle sticks seems
Uh-huh.
difficult to me. So being like, I have to learn how to build a whole freaking house. Like, how long did that take you?
I mean, you learn while you do it is really what ends up happening. And the house took um 13 months total.
That's
And I ended
it?
up I like hired a local kind of handyman, jack of all trades type who worked with me like 2 days a week. And so, you know, he would get me started on things and then I would keep going on them.
So that's
Wow.
wild. And you designed it yourself, or did you buy a template offline?
So I bought a set of plans, which at that time there was really very few people selling tiny house plans. There was this one company called Tumbleweed Tiny Houses, and so I bought a set of plans for like $750, which is so crazy now because like tiny house plans now cost a fraction of that just because there are so many of them. And I was pretty dead set on that house, and then I think I was at like a family dinner at Thanksgiving, I think, and a really good friend of my parents is a local designer architect type, and I was talking to him. I was a little nervous about it because he's a really quiet, really smart person, and you were like, what is he's like very quiet, and then we'll say something and just like drop the knowledge. So I was like kind of showing the plans, and he was very quiet, and he said, I think I think Ethan's tiny house can do better than this. And so he really wanted to design a tiny house and I really wanted to build a tiny house. So I ended up getting like pro bono architect work on this tiny house. And I mean, I never would have been able to afford to hire him for what it costs to actually have a house designed. So that was a real lucky thing for me.
That is so cool. And I mean, did you have any carpenter building background at all?
No. Well, I had built a couple of things. Like I helped I helped my parents build a chicken coop right before I started the tiny house. Um and like my dad is like handy. Like we would like, rewire an outlet or like, patch drywall, do like little handy projects around the house together, but we'd never built anything. But building is something that like almost anyone can learn how to do. It's I think there is something innately human about like making shelter for yourself. And you know, it's not rocket science either. Like and no and obviously like a professional builder can produce things that are much much higher quality and much faster than the layman, but um it is definitely learnable, and through the years I've just seen so many different kinds of people of all ages and ability um build their own houses. But I mean, like, I also would caution you that it's a majorly exhausting undertaking that will consume your life, and it's not worth it for everybody to build their own. Like, unless that's an experience that you really want to have, the building experience, um, then don't do it.
My father is a carpenter by trade, so maybe that'll make this his retirement project for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, don't let him fact check my answers either. No.
You're totally good. Oh, that's so interesting. I also threw my hands up before because I worked on a learning and development team. I was on the trainer side, but did a little bit of crossover with instructional design. So just shout out to all the
Nice.
instructional designers. Appreciate you.
Nobody else does, but we appreciate each other.
That's true. That is true. Oh, that's super funny.
When people
Okay.
ask you what like instructional design is, I'm like, that like training that you had to take at work where you had to keep clicking through the slides and then take a quiz at the end?
That
I'm
was
like,
me.
yeah, I made that.
You're like, and when you went off the browser, it stops playing because
Yeah.
you're forced to watch it. I did that.
Yeah.
Yup. Been there. As the deliverer of it, though, I mean, some of it's video based, obviously, but we'd get the facilitator guides. And I think people liked our training, but every once in a while you'd do one or you'd have a participant that would not want to be there. And
Yeah.
that was always my favorite, though, because I was just like, I mean, this might be required, but if you don't want to participate and be here, the door is right there. You're more than welcome to leave.
I think that the like instructional designers, the training department, if there is one, people come to you with organizational problems that they don't want to solve themselves, and they're like, oh, training can solve this cultural problem, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I like we could have a whole podcast on L&D.
You're listening to the Instructional Design North podcast.
We truly could. Oh, that's awesome. I feel seen right now. All right, so back to tiny houses. So you were starting to mention the change in lifestyle. I'd be curious, like, what was going on in your mind? I mean, you weren't fully enjoying your corporate job. You wanted to reduce your expenses. Was there like a level deeper than that?
Well, I think that I was definitely scared of not knowing what I wanted to do, or not. I think that everyone around me, all my friends from college and before, we're having these kind of careers and we're starting to like climb the professional ladder. And I think that I was grappling with, and I think I'm still grappling with, like 10 years later. No, I like that I'm not sure that I want that. And so I think that the tiny house project gave me something to really focus on and really dive into, that helped me like almost have a reason that I was quitting my job, like that I wasn't just quitting my job to like sit around and like to just have like more leisure time, because that, there's certainly some shame to like when you think about what are people thinking about me, like I don't have a normal job, they must think I'm lazy.
Woo.
Yeah. Woo.
We just had I just had a similar conversation on the phone with one of my friends that was laid off, and I was also laid off during COVID too. And just the shame even in that. And I've been unemployed now for, this will be 5 months, and I've been doing a lot of really cool things with it. But to your point, I feel like people sometimes still look at me, and as someone who was a workaholic and, ran a business and put so much of my identity into my career and into the work I was doing, and now just being like, I do creative projects and travel. And yes, I think people think that's really cool. And there's the other side to it of like, you gonna get a job, or like, what are you really doing with your life? Like, this is only gonna last for so long, which in my case, I agree with. Like, I'm trying to apply for jobs. But I get that shame, and I have to kind of pep myself up sometimes too, and just be like, hey, like, yes, you're doing cool things. And also remember, like, I'm even nervous now just to go back into the workforce. I'm like, well, I remember how to have a job, which sounds so silly, because of course I will. But the stories that we spin in our own heads as you're in the state of uncertainty.
Definitely.
It's also crazy the shame that follows you up until the point where you are confident in where you're at. And what I mean by that is like, I have a job, I have benefits and everything, but the job that I took was less responsibility so that I could have the energy to be able to do my side stuff and live the life I want, because my time is valuable. And working through the shame even there too, that like the job that I have isn't enough and stuff like that. So I feel like over the course of really standing in my ability to choose what I want and like really intending to choose it and then show up, um, I'm getting there. I'm a lot closer than I've ever been, and I think that's allowing me to show up. To just show up better in general. But it's a journey. The shame has seemed to follow me.
Yeah, and I guess for me, like when I left the job, I was I was specialized enough. I was kind of the only person, not the only, but like one of just a couple of people who were doing what I was doing at the company. And I managed to kind of turn my job into from a full-time job into a consulting position, where essentially I kept doing the work that I was doing just on a project by project basis. And so I was working from home, or I was working from wherever. And that was great because, I was getting paid a ton, because when you become a consultant, like somehow you get to like triple or quadruple your hourly rate, because they're not paying for benefits, they're not paying for retirement, they're not paying for vacation days or any of that stuff. And so that like helped me have the extra money, because I went way over budget on the tiny house. It helped me have the extra money also to be able to hire the person to help me, which I still am convinced that I don't know if I would have finished the house if I hadn't done that, because I was moving so slowly. I was second guessing everything. And so it was a nice it was a slow transition from like consulting and building the house, and then, you know, keeping consulting but also starting this business and starting to build it up. And then, you know, consultants are the first to go when like the company has like a any up or down, usually any down. And so there was one point where like I didn't have any projects, and I just made the decision like I'm not going to hustle. I'm not going to hustle for another project. I'm going to just like focus in on this tiny house thing that I'm doing. And I think that helped the people around me at least see like, oh, cool, Ethan's doing something. Like he's building something. Well, he's built a house and now he's building this business. But even just for me, it's like anybody who makes a comment that is kind of comments on how much free time I have, it just triggers this shame, where even if it's a compliment, but it's like, especially from somebody older, like an uncle or an aunt saying like, oh, wow, well, that's nice. Isn't that nice for you that you're like, going skiing on a Tuesday? And it's only been in the last, like, I feel like year. I don't know what has changed, but I've just kind of decided that like I work hard, but I do it on my own terms. And now I'm kind of getting the rewards from that, and I'm lucky, but it just is what it is.
So cultural, just that hustle mentality that we've been taught. And I will say I'm recovering from that too, just accepting that I don't need to hustle all the time, and that downtime is good. And I want to have a life outside of work, even if I'm trying to strive for an entrepreneurial pursuit, because I think the corporate world has that for sure. And then it's like, to be a true entrepreneur, you must work 150 hours a week and never leave your business and blah, 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 blah. And it's very hard to break out of that mindset and not feel the shame.
Yeah.
There's an organization, and I don't remember what it is. I think it's a tea brand or something. And there's an interview that I read from, it was either the owner or the CEO. And they were saying, we for sure could make a ton more money. Like, we could make more profits, but the business model that, I am working towards, or we are working towards, is one that we make the profits that allow us to be able to, make it, run the business and some, and grow it at a rate that also allows us to be human, is what I'm going to say, just to sum it up. And I loved that. It was like, at a point in time, I was working up in Vancouver, and I remember thinking to myself, like, shit, yes, somebody else, like, I was thinking that, but then I was like, who am I? Like, some, young whatever who's just trying, again, telling myself, like, oh, you're just trying to not work as hard. But that's not what I was trying to do. I was like, actually, I think I'll be better at what I do if I have the chance to actually, like, explore who I am and take a break and try new things. And so to have this, like, who I deemed as an authority figure be saying something so profound, I was like, look, it can work. Like, and I think I've taken that with me, even on the smaller scale for myself, of like, okay, what's the lifestyle I actually want to have? And what's the trade-off? What am I choosing? What's the value of, what am I going to actually put my energy towards? So I'm appreciative of whoever that person was from whatever that organization was.
Yeah, sometimes I think, how can I'm sure there are people out there that can, but for me, it's like, how can I be creative or even have like a strong big picture futuristic thinking when I'm just completely stressed out and burnt out all the time? And that's something I learned running the studio. Is when I would take those breaks, I would go on vacation, I would go for a long hike. That's when all the creativity would get flowing and the big ideas. And I would end up thinking about work anyway, and building things in my mind that I just like couldn't have done if I was in the space and just like grinding away at tasks. And I'm trying to carry that over into any job and position I do, and also really put like my stake in the ground of, if someone's like, oh, you need to be at your desk doing it, it's like, actually, if I go for a 2-hour hike, I bet you I'll come up with a bunch of solutions to your problems. So go let me do that, and we'll all be better off.
Right. Yeah, you need the space to be creative and to think. It's not like a linear thing.
Definitely not. I'm curious, can we talk about trust and doubt in your process? Because for so many people, leaving the quote unquote safety of a corporate job or taking a risk to start a business, I'm sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there were moments maybe where you doubted that this was possible. You maybe doubted yourself. And if that was the case, I'm also curious how you continue to come back to trust and confidence that you'd be able to do it.
Sure. I mean, I'll start by saying that this whole process for me has been immensely privileged. And, my parents paid for my college. I didn't have college debt that I was having to service while I was also, leaving my job to build a tiny house. I had a free place to stay while I was building it. I had a lot of support from family. Like, there was never a real chance that I would ever be actually homeless. And that is certainly not the case for many people who are now interested in the tiny house movement. It's kind of interesting to see where we've come, which is now we're like there could be this huge wave of evictions whenever the protections run out. And, tiny houses, I think, are going to be in huge demand. But anyhow, trust and doubt. I think that I am a very cautious person. And so, I probably didn't really ever take that big of a leap. It all happened like in very small increments and stages. Like, I turned the corporate job into the consulting job. So like my income didn't really take much of a hit. And, by the time that those corporate jobs were kind of winding down, the projects, I had already launched like I had started a different business, actually, like doing technology coaching. And I had clients through that business. And then I, just was seeing this immense interest in tiny houses. I was getting so many questions based on like a Facebook page that I had started, and then a WordPress website. And so I just saw that there was demand. And so it wasn't that big of a leap to then like say, okay, I'm going to write a book about my process in this and put it up for sale. So I was very cautious about like taking big leaps, but I think I still had and continue to have doubts from time to time. Certainly I had doubt about whether I could even build the house, but made it through that. I think that my biggest doubts have been around, whether what I'm doing now is sustainable, and like what's next, like what am I going to have to come up with next to like keep bringing in income, because at this point I kind of think I'm unemployable.
I would love to hear more about that statement.
I know. I was like, I wanted to just say,
There's a little cliffhanger. I was
tell
like,
me
what?
more. Keep talking.
Well, I mean, I think I'm unemployable because, well, I haven't done instructional design in so long, and I've always been kind of a multi-pod. Like I'm interested in a lot of different things, and I'm not really a specialist at any one thing. And so I don't really know what kind of job I even could get. But also I'm unemployable because I don't really want to work for anyone ever again anyway. So I think that makes me unemployable mostly, that I just don't want to have a job.
My body is like electrical currents right now from that statement. Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations about that too, just being like a jack of all trades, and like in theory that should be a good thing, and many times it is, but also how it pushes you away from more specialized jobs, even though
Right.
And again, as someone who's applying for jobs, I'm like, I'm perfectly capable of doing that, just because I have a diverse background with immense amount of like soft and potentially hard skills. But people will be like, but you haven't been doing this one thing for 10 years. And I'm like, okay, the internet and half the tools we're using right now were not even around 10 years ago. So come on. But I've definitely had to have those conversations and look and seek organizations that are looking for someone that can wear many hats while still acknowledging that I don't know if I want to wear that many hats anymore either.
Right.
I've definitely applied for a lot of like startup jobs, and like being more intentional, like coming up front in interviews and being like, hey, I'm your ops person. I'll manage the projects, but like I don't want to try to be the person that can do every single skill set in the marketing department. And
Right.
That has been something that's been really, really relatable for me lately.
There's got to come a time where organizations are going to realize that both expertise and a broad, like a portfolio of, a portfolio ability, are both beneficial, and how to tap into both. Because it's interesting. I was like, I never had somebody tell me I didn't have enough experience, which is weird because maybe they should have, in some jobs. But what I started to get was how do I know you're going to stay? But that just might be an age thing, because I feel like now that's kind of like common. Companies are having to figure out like how to work with the fact that a lot of, I think, the younger people are not staying, because there are so many options. But I remember that being the question of like I was having to prove my commitment level and to an organization, and they're like, why would we invest in you if you're not going to stay? So it's kind of interesting, the shift
Flip
in.
that on its head and be like, well, what are you going to do to make me want to stay?
Exactly. So now when I think about that, I'm like, oh man, that's what I would say. But back then, I don't know. I don't know if maybe I just wasn't at a confidence level place with my own boundaries, or if that even seemed like a feasible thing to say, but absolutely, like 100%. So I want to hear about imposter syndrome. How does that play? So like, how did that come into the picture?
Yeah, well, so there's romance here, which is that I had started dating my wife Anne before I left on the bike trip. Um, I think we started dating in February and I left on the trip in like October. And as I was building the house, we stayed together. And while I was building the house, I moved in with her. And so the original, and she owned and owns this little condo in Burlington, Vermont. So the original reason that I wanted to build a tiny house, to live in it full time and save a ton of money, was no longer at the core of what I needed the tiny house for. And she loves the tiny house, so we spend a lot of time there. It's about an hour away from Burlington, and it's in the mountains near skiing. And so it became kind of this like vacation getaway for us. But and I don't hide that fact in anything that I do online, because I still built the thing myself, but I certainly can't speak to long-term living in it. I've spent weeks at a time there, which I think gives a pretty good sense of what it's like to be there, but again, not full time. So I think that there's some imposter syndrome around that, of just like, I'm an expert in this field. I sell a book about it's called Tiny House Decisions, and it walks people through all these big decisions, and then it kind of explains all the systems in your house and how they interact, and helps you figure out what you're going to do for your own tiny house. So I feel confident in that knowledge, but I also, not being somebody who's living in it full time, I'm not like producing. I can't do Instagram stories every day, like look at my glamorous tiny life, or like, write, about what life was like today in the tiny house. And I think it's something that I've always, wrestled with in the space. And then the other thing is, again, being such a generalist, that like, I built the house myself, but I'm not a professional builder. So I don't teach people how to build, nor would, nobody wants to learn to build from me. So I'm not an electrician, I'm not a plumber, I'm not a carpenter. Like, what am I? Like, I'm a connector of knowledge. I'm good at explaining things and taking complicated things and breaking them down and making them simple. So my instructional design background. And then the other way I've kind of worked through that is just starting my own podcast, which has allowed me, I think, to apply those skills and talk to experts and kind of extract the good stuff, extract from these experts what they know and present it to an audience who wants to learn.
This is so juicy and relatable to everything in life. So much so. I'm going to sit in it for a second. I have a lot of thoughts in my head, but Rachel, if you had something to say, go for it.
So when Jenell was telling me that we were going to talk to you, she kept calling it imposter complex. Was that you who called it that? And if yes, why did you call it a complex versus a syndrome? And does that matter?
I think I called it imposter syndrome.
So Jenell, did you call it a complex? All day I've been like, I cannot wait to find out what the difference is.
I don't know. I think I got it from you, Ethan, but who knows?
All right, well, that was my question.
Well, if I did, then I was using it interchangeably, and I'm sorry to
Dang it.
disappoint you that there's not some crazy definition of imposter complex.
I
Do you
like
think
them both.
Yeah. Do you think if you were on your own that you would spend more time at the tiny house, or do you think at a certain point you maybe would be doing the same thing you're doing right now?
Well, I certainly would have lived there for a time, full time. I have no idea. I think that living here, though it's not a tiny house, it's a pretty tiny condo, has allowed me to do things that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to do in the tiny house in terms of just like hobbies and projects and things. I have no idea. When I built the house, I guess I'll give you the answer of what I was thinking when I built it, which was I thought it would cost about $20,000 to $25,000 to build. And I figured that if I could live in it for 2 to 3 years, then I would have recouped what I would have paid in like rent and other living expenses. So my goal was 2 to 3 years.
I think this is just so interesting too, because it goes back to like linear living and templates where there's this blueprint, right, that we've been handed that we talk about normally, where it's like go to college, get a job, climb the corporate ladder, have children, get married, retire, die. And then we're starting to go into these niches where it's like there are other options. Now build a tiny house, but live in it full time and be a true tiny house person and do all the things. But we're just building another blueprint of the quote unquote right way to do it. And I think it's cool. It's like you're not following the normal format and this new niche format. You're making your own that actually works for who you are today. And I guarantee it's like your unique niche of a niche where there's probably other people out there that are like, I want a tiny house, but maybe I don't want to live in it full time. And maybe I do want it to be my vacation rental. And you're paving a path for them to see yet another example of what it could look like to be a tiny house owner.
Right. And interestingly, most of the people who are become customers, I would say, are, at this, from where they're sitting now, they're like, yeah, I want to live in this thing full time. Millennials don't stay in their tiny houses. I'll tell you that. Like, I mean, I'm making like a generalization, but like most of the millennials who build tiny houses, myself included, like they're in them for a couple of years and then they, either get married or they're married and then they get pregnant and like then they move on to like the next house. And I thought that the tiny house movement was totally just a young person's thing, but like you would not believe the number of boomers who are like retiring into tiny houses, and they're the ones that are going to stay in them forever.
It's really interesting, but it makes sense. Yeah. Once you're retired too, you do have limited funds and you're not necessarily
right.
generating more income.
I was also going to say, I love the nuance call out, Jenell. And also what I heard you saying in all of your description there is that you have like a tiny house state of mind. And so even though you're not maybe in your specific tiny house, like 24/7, it's a way of being.
Yeah. I just like lit up there. 'Cause like, that's the book that I haven't written yet. I don't know if I ever will because I'm a slow writer. It's just like how to get this is a really inelegant title, but it's like how to get the benefits of tiny house living without ever living in a tiny house.
100%.
Because you don't actually have, you can do almost all of the lifestyle things that a tiny house gives you without a tiny house.
Totally. Again, again, with the RV, so I was living in Dallas. I was in a relationship. We've recently broken up. And I moved all my stuff. Well, not all my stuff. I have very little things now. But I moved to California to be closer to my family. And I'm staying with my parents because I'm like, I just need a home base. And then I really want to be spending time out on the road, which is honestly in my head. It was like, this is so simple. I have a remote role and I just go in the van and I go do my thing. And it's not that simple. There are so many more logistics to take into consideration, and it's fun to figure out. Anyways, my point being, I minimized, and I'm in the process of moving a lot, and so I don't tend to like keep a lot of stuff, and I'm really good at figuring out like what are the IKEA items that work for me that I know my routine of moving from place to place. But this time I really decided to get rid of quite a bit. All that I could fit in the RV, and there was tons of space left in the RV. I just don't have that much. And I'm now living with my parents. It is a gigantic house. It's insane how big the house is. But I don't I still feel good with the amount of things that I have, and I know how to use this space to really surround myself with the things that matter. I don't feel at a deficit. I also don't feel out of place because it feels like the idea and the essence of the experience that I'm creating for myself goes beyond the walls of whatever environment I'm in.
I'm
Yeah.
curious. Oh, go for it, Ethan.
I was going to just say that like that really resonates, and that's just totally a tiny house mentality of kind of being mindful about how you fill your space and what you fill your space with.
That was going to be my question. I was going to say, Ethan, how do you describe the tiny house state of mind? But did you just do it, or is there more to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's part minimalism, part simplicity, part like environmental friendliness. I think that it has a lot to do with our relationship to stuff and like what stuff we keep and how much stuff we fill our lives with. And then of course just the idea of reducing your expenses drastically below what your income is. And that's what living in a tiny house does for a lot of people. And then it's also about not an aversion to, but many tiny house people are getting out of debt and not having a mortgage and just, experiencing life without a huge monthly bill, and then, recalibrating to what, how much do I have to work to afford my life? And again, those are just all things you can do without a tiny house potentially.
What's the one thing that stayed? This might not be a fair question because I don't know how often you've moved or gotten rid of things. But the question that I had was, what is the thing that has stayed that you've that's made it through every single move? I was thinking about that when I unpacked some stuff here. I was like, you have made it every place. Every time I was like, nope, this has to come with me. It's just funny.
I mean, I always have a guitar with me, and my original instrument was a violin, and my violin is never gonna leave. So yeah, musical instruments. I'm not a minimalist in terms of musical instruments. I own too many, and they're not all even here. But I scatter them around so that I convince myself that it's okay, because like when I go to my parents' house, there's a guitar there to play.
It's super interesting, the idea of what people value, specifically when you have that minimalist mindset. Living on the road now, and I filled up my Subaru Crosstrek. That's what I originally had, which for a small vehicle actually fits quite a bit in it. And then after that, I reduced it basically to 2 suitcases, and I live out of like a big suitcase and a little suitcase, and that's what I carry with me. But it is funny that my partner, who I'm traveling with right now, just to see like what does come, and like for him it's a hot sauce collection. We lug around like 25 jars.
Damn.
Of hot sauce like at all times. And it's funny because like again, like 2 suitcases of things, and yet we are lugging around 20 jars of hot sauce. And just
Has that been a fact about you yet?
I know. I'm trying to
Oh.
think of like what my thing is, because that's definitely his thing. I don't eat hot sauce, but yeah, like what is the thing that just like has to come with? I'm gonna have to think about that for me. But Rachel, did you figure out what yours was with that question?
Well, yeah, and I was gonna say, so I've said this before on the podcast, so maybe I'm manifesting it, but I have moved so many times that like I'm really good at the psychological aspects of it, the logistics of it. Like I know how to do it efficiently. I know when you get to the place what things to consider so that you can easily transition into a new environment. Um, and so as funny as that hot sauce is, like that has been a huge thing. I should actually figure out how many places my ex-boyfriend and I lived in the 7 years we were together. But it was like, I don't think we were in the same place for even a year. And so we both just
Setting
got
up.
really good at it. And one of the things that we realized after the first few moves is the things that each of us needed to immediately have a sense of like home, quote unquote. And so that hot sauce for him is probably, probably has indicators that actually like calm him down. For me, it's like I have a selenite wand. I have a big one, but then I have smaller ones. And if I can put it in my pocket, or if I can find a place to work out, again, for my ex, it was a really good cup of coffee. So we always made sure before we moved to a place that we had these like go-to places already in our mind to kind of like root us in. But anyways, what's funny, so that when I unpacked this time, I always have sports equipment. So like fishing poles, tackle box, skis, boots, like all my just like gear, bike stuff. That's pretty much most of it. And then it's actually, I was going to bring them over, but that's obnoxious. I'm not going to do that. I have like an array of, and I don't really like tchotchkes, but over the years, I've acquired little statues that represent each of my grandparents that have passed. And then there's one for my mom, there's one for my dad. And it's like these important people in my life have somehow become these like, I have a whale, a bird that my grandfather carved from wood, a rock with a little ladybug on it that my mom painted in like 8th grade. She's like, you still have that? Like, I just have these things that represent different people. And it's almost like becoming a moving altar for me, which is cool. I feel like my people are there. We're good. So it's funny. That's actually the thing that has made it. And my plants too always make it. They always have to make it.
How do you move with your plants? Because I'll drop like $300 on plants, and then I have to give them to all my friends every time I move. I'm like, here are my plants.
I don't keep all of them, but I definitely like there is a handful that make it, and I figured out this one they were in like a big Home Depot box with like blankets around them, and they're my little pals.
You're like breeding like the hardiest plants, because the ones that don't make it die, and the ones that you keep are just like the super plants.
So true.
That is so true. We
Just
had an episode on plants, and are those the ones that you sing to and pet most frequently?
Mm-hmm. They're the best. I'm obsessed with them. I like pet their leaves and I say hello, and then they're like, stop touching me.
I would say I always buy a candle when I travel, like a
candle.
candle, and then my journal, and I need food. That's actually really what I've discovered when I'm traveling, because I'm not like that much of a restaurant kind of girl, and I don't enjoy going out to eat that much unless it's like a special experience. So like to have snacks and like a fridge full of stuff really matters to me. Like I get a lot of anxiety until I go to the grocery store and I like gather my little concoction of things that I like to eat, and then I feel much calmer.
What's the smell of the candle?
It's always different. That I do normally buy.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's just the fact that I can light a candle.
This is the one that I bring everywhere. It's called True Hue Stargazing.
Ooh.
What does that smell like?
Well, I'll tell you. It's complex. Mandarin, vetiver, neroli, sandalwood, patchouli, clary sage, lemon, grapefruit, Guatemalan chocolate.
Whoa.
Try to imagine what that smells like.
Damn.
It's delicious. I have 3 others just at the helm waiting.
Super fun. I love all the things. I know I'm being on the road for almost 6 months now. And my stuff has been in storage for even longer than that. I'm definitely starting to miss, though, like some of the more like having plants and having just those little touches that are like exclusively me. I know when I moved into my apartment at the beginning of this year, thinking I was going to be there for a year, Rachel, you and I chatted about just like the importance and the sometimes unique opportunity of when you're a single person moving into a new space and you can just create the space and make it everything that you want it to be for you. And how that environment just invigorates you and just for me it creates like such a safe little nest, and I don't necessarily need it, but I definitely am starting to feel like the lack of my nest that has my things, and I've built custom for me to make sure that I feel comfortable.
So it's interesting to hear both of you talk about these things because you are both traveling on the road a lot. And for me and for a lot of tiny house dwellers, like we don't end up moving around that much. You know, these houses on wheels aren't really that convenient to move. They're like movable, but not like a travel accessory. And so, you know, I was kind of thinking about this while you were talking, and like I guess the tiny house for me is the object that feels like home. Like it's it was like designed, you know, I was so involved in the design and building it, and then, you know, it's actually right now it's in a transitional parking space right now, but for 6 years it was on this really gorgeous little piece of land that we were renting, and it was just that space was what reminded me of home because it just felt so homey. um and it's interesting now, like that the tiny house isn't where it's been for so long, and it's like it's not like unappealing, but it certainly doesn't have the same feeling. And maybe it's because I know that it's not staying where it is right now for very long, but um I'm interested in reconnecting with it when once it does land back in a kind of permanent parking space to like really make it feel like home again.
Do you know where it's going to end up? Do you have a hope?
Um, I mean, we're kind of in a like interesting transition period right now, just figuring out. So my wife just graduated from a master's in nursing program, and she's looking for an NP job, and we want to stay in Vermont. So I think most likely it's going to be somewhere within an hour of where we are now. Um, but then again, we've also like batted around some. We recently did a road trip in California and just fell in love with like the Joshua Tree area, 29 Palms, like north of Joshua Tree. And you know, we were like, what if we just bought like a $5,000 lot in 29 Palms and just stuck the tiny house there, and like because like Vermont is so gray in the winter that like the lack of sun is a thing. So we're like, what if we just had a place to go? So who knows? Who knows? I guess is my answer.
The benefit of wheels. I mean,
Yes.
you would wheel it across the country, right?
Yeah, I would probably hire a company to tow it
Yeah.
out across the
Yeah.
country. Yeah. But yeah, it is on a trailer.
So, okay, a logistical question.
Sure.
What kind of plumbing is it?
So are you asking about the toilet? Is that
Yeah, and the shower, like both. Just because, so I originally wanted a van, so expensive. So then I ended up with the RV that I have, which is way more space for one person than a small child size human like me needs, but I have it nonetheless. And there's so many components. I'm just curious because it seems fairly similar. And so, yeah.
yeah, so it's got a regular I'm going to say regular plumbing. Um
Hmm.
it has, well, what's not regular is that there's a 40-gallon tank for fresh water. Um but there are no holding tanks for like
Got
gray or
it.
black water.
So when you
So
get to wherever, it plugs into an existing plumbing structure.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Do you
Yeah.
have to, like, how do you keep things warm enough in the winter?
So there is heat. So there's a propane direct vent heater.
Got it. So
And
fascinating.
yeah, I mean, it's like the utilities in the house are like a normal house.
Yeah.
So there's a propane direct vent heater. There's a tiny little hot water tank. There is a shower. And I would say the most alternative thing about it is just that we do a compost toilet, which, is a very simple bucket style toilet that you use
Yeah.
sawdust with.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so fascinating. Again, my ex-boyfriend was really into all sorts of structures. And so it gave me an appreciation for the nuances between the different styles and options. I mean, even like container house living was something we had talked about. And yeah, I think your earlier point that there's a really big opportunity for some of these smaller structures to come in and support some of the communities. I think it's a really good one. I'm very curious to see what ends up happening with the shifts of neighborhoods and things like that.
Yeah.
This has been awesome. One, we'll need to definitely have pictures and photos of
Oh,
your
totally.
tiny house and share those out. We like to start to close the podcast with a final question. Rachel, are you ready for it, or do you have any lingering questions?
Sorry, couldn't get the mute
Okay.
off. No, I think I'm good. I'm excited that you have resources that you've compiled on this conversation, because I think it has been a space that has, I don't know, from my perspective, I think it's grounded. It's been grounded in the mindset piece, which I think is maybe could be hard to wrap your head around. But from here, it's like if you resonate with honestly, like the vibe that the conversation is coming from, to know that there's resources that you've compiled on what next steps might be and what it could look like is really cool. Like I felt like not pressured to need to go there, and also really excited to be able to go there and to continue to explore, because I think it is a really fascinating idea. The sentiment of, I don't know, the existing construct and path feels very heavy to me. And I think it just lends itself to so much more flexibility and options. And I don't know, almost like a choose your own adventure a little bit. So I really appreciate the conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, me too.
So, Ethan, how do you live your true north in one word?
I would say that my one word is play.
Love.
Me
Love,
too.
love,
We've
love.
never had that. We always have a different answer. Isn't that crazy?
It's super interesting.
Yeah.
You want to ask the last question, Rachel?
Sure. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
I would say my website, which is thetinyhouse.net, is the place where you'll find everything else. And if you're the podcasting type, which you probably are, Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast is in all the podcast apps. So look for it there. It's a weekly conversation with tiny house dwellers, professional builders, people doing interesting things in and around the movement, and then also just anything that interests me. Like this week we had a guy on who does cob building, which is like the natural you basically mix clay soil, like soil that has a lot of clay in it, with straw and water, and it's like earthen houses building. Yeah, so all kinds of cool like
Wait.
alternative
Isn't
housing
that
stuff.
an Adobe style house?
Kind of. Adobe is like a specific kind of clay. This is like kind of even older school, because it's like literally like dirt and straw.
Is it an earth bag house? Have you heard of those?
I have heard of that, but it's not an earth bag house.
Okay.
But similar idea.
I stayed in an earth bag house and it was slightly terrifying,
Nice.
but also awesome.
But anyhow, digression about the podcast,
right,
and that it's not just, what I'm trying to say is that it's not just tiny houses on wheels.
Super cool. We'll make sure to link to all of that in the show notes as well, so people can easily access it.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Ethan. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, we appreciate your time and sharing what a tiny house mindset looks like, and more about the movement and just the realities too of being an entrepreneur and a generalist.
You're in good company if you think that we are good company.
I do.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.